Welcome to the 7th episode of BC Under the Hood series. So when we design new features at Microsoft and for Business Central, we spend a lot of time writing code, writing tests, doing manual tests, and also fixing bugs, obviously. But there's also another aspect of designing new features, which is your user interface and the user experience. And today with me I have Jacob. Jacob, this is your area. So tell us a little bit about what's your role in the Business Central engineering team, and what do you actually work with?
Thank you, Vincent. I'd love to. And thanks for inviting me.
Sure.
It's
My
an honor
pleasure.
to sit in this chair,
Yeah.
knowing sort of who else has been sitting here telling about Business Central. So thanks a lot. Yes, so I'm Jacob Winther, and I'm leading the Business Central design team. And what we do, quickly stated, is that we are working with the engineering teams and the program managers to design and implement the features that goes into Business Central. So that means the visual appearance, the interaction ways, and the whole sort of how it works in a given area of Business Central.
So that's what you call the user experience, or UX,
Yes.
and UI. So these are the terms that we usually use, right? UI for the actual graphical design and the pixels, right?
Right.
And UX for user experience.
Yes. So the user interface is the actual thing you see. You look at the thing that is being designed, and the user experience is what sort of happens around that user interface. And the distinction is sometimes important because the user interface is not just, it's of course serving up the data and allowing users to work with Business Central, but to have a good user experience, you also need to provide the documentation, the whole way that users get to discover the product, discover the features, and so on. So user experience is a much broader concept than the user interface, which is literally just what you see on the screen and that you click on.
So it's actually just a user interface is just a subset of it, and the graphical design but the user experience and the graphical design are very connected, right?
Yes.
But it's kind of a subset of the whole thing.
Yes, so the user interface lets users access Business Central, and it is a visual design, so it has to look attractive, and it is an interaction design. It means that when you click a button, something has to happen, and when you click two buttons next after each other, it has to sort of connect logically, conceptually. So there's a lot of ways where you can look at the user experience and break down what it's part of, but user interface is obviously sort of the main thing that is being designed.
So what is the usual process when we design a new feature? So at what stage do you get involved, and what do you do? What's your role in what's your part in a new feature design?
Yes, I think we could talk a lot about sort of that topic alone, but just to sort of paraphrase it a little bit, then we have some features where we have a long period where the feature is being sort of conceptualized, understood, and researched. And when we are part of that feature, and the prime example there would be something like the onboarding project, which was a release investment where we gradually build out those features. And we had a somewhat long period leading up to that to understand what is onboarding about. So that is, I mean, that literally took multiple releases to research and design and implement. And then we have sort of smaller features, like the other example we can talk about later is what is now the company switcher, where you can go in and you can switch between the different companies in Business Central. That was a much shorter period of time, sort of from the idea that we wanted to do something to the research, through the design, to the shipping, was done in a much shorter time. So it really depends on what kind of feature and what kind of an investment we are putting in there. But generally speaking, we try to get involved as early as possible with sort of the key investments, so we can do our sort of due diligence in terms of understanding who is the audience for this feature, what is the problem we are solving, have several stages of the mock-ups and redlines. I can also show an example of that. And then the implementation phase, where we also involved in overseeing that that it is living up to the intentions, and often also catching stuff that wasn't discovered early on. So I mean, nobody's perfect. So I mean, as you perfectly know, we discover stuff along the way. That means we have to adjust plans, and that's sort of just how software development works.
So you're involved from also on the big design, the big feature, multi-releases features, from the conceptual inception of things, but also in smaller areas, smaller features, like.
Yes.
And so you are, as you say, you're involved at all and in many stages of the design process.
Yes.
So when is there a set of rules you are using or reference? So when you make these designs, is there somewhere you can look up as a reference?
Yeah. I almost wish there was sort of a book of solutions where you could look in and just pull out the one and go ahead. And obviously, to meet users' expectations, we need to factor in their conceptions of the world. Mm-hmm. So I would say that the first thing we're looking at is we're trying to understand where is the users coming from. But
that requires for you to know actually our users pretty well.
Yes, so a good part of our work is working with users, both customers and partners, to understand their perspective of things. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about a Business Central feature, we are obviously a lot of the time talking about Business Central users. So when we are having a new feature, we try to look at which of the Business Central users are going to use this feature, how are they understanding Business Central, and we try to align with their conceptions. So I would say the first big light post for us when we design a feature is sort of the understandings that the users are going to have. Then, being part of Microsoft, there's a whole sort of body of design and concepts that are coming from not necessarily sort of a central source, but there's a lot of work in Microsoft going on that also establish patterns and interaction paradigms and visuals and branding and so on.
So that's a way to align across products, right?
Yes, exactly.
So we don't have like a Word looks in a way and then Business Central will look totally different, confusing the users, right?
Exactly. The mantra of One Microsoft also means that when users go into One Microsoft products and are trying and doing something, then they have the advantage that when they come to another Microsoft product, if they can use the same pattern or paradigm, even down to the same icon for, a common concept like sharing. Mm-hmm. It would be difficult if in one program from Microsoft the share icon looked one way and in another program it looked in another way. So that would not have that recognition. So we are looking heavily at other Microsoft products and standards and guidelines to guide how we are designing Business Central. And in terms of what we call the design language, simply what kind of styling do you choose for Business Central? We are adhering to what is known as the Fluent design language, which is Microsoft's sort of official. So
is it a Microsoft kind of developed design language for all Microsoft products?
Yes. So people can find it online. There's just search for Fluent design language, and you can find style guides and widgets for the Fluent design language.
We can put links in the description. Yeah.
Yep. And it's a fully encompassing design language for all the stuff you would expect in a user interface, like drop downs and input fields and radio buttons and what have you. And that's sort of
icons, colors, all that is defined, or
yes. So of course we are giving the Business Central product the Business Central sort of treatment in the sense that, given our fantastic legacy of Business Central, there's a lot of the patterns and ways of working that we have brought along.
And so it's important our user, when they see the product, they recognize it at Business Central as well, right?
Yes,
but they don't
exactly.
look when they don't think, oh, maybe it's Word or Excel or something. But
right.
Like everybody, Excel is like the green and Word is like the blue, and so what's Business Central?
Yes, so we have, in terms of color, we have this sort of teal brand. But people often say that Excel and Word and PowerPoint are similar, but really it's an illusion, right? Because if you look at those programs, they do a lot of things differently for good reasons, because one is for presentation, the other is for word processing, and the second is for spreadsheet.
And BC is an ERP product.
And Business Central is for another thing. So we are definitely aligning where it makes sense, and we are also, in terms of aligning with Microsoft Office, is a huge inspiration for us in terms of how things should work and act. But we cannot just pull the answers from Office, because we have to adjust it to what are users actually doing in Business Central, what are the tasks they have. And they are not creating presentations in Business Central. They are not sort of writing letters in Business Central. They are doing ERP tasks. So obviously we look heavily, and that would be sort of the third pillar of what we're looking at, is simply what tasks are users doing? What do we need to do to make Business Central successful? To make our users successful in Business Central.
So I want to talk a little bit about Figma. You use that a lot in your team, right? Can you tell us a little bit what that is and how you use it, or maybe some of us users are familiar with it, but
yes. So Figma is a design tool. It's sort of the preferred choice for many Microsoft teams these days.
So it's not a Microsoft tool, is it?
It's not a Microsoft tool. It's actually recently acquired by Adobe. So these days it's an Adobe tool. And it's interesting with Adobe, because a lot of people obviously know Illustrator and Photoshop and Acrobat and sort of the Adobe portfolio. So Figma was a nice sort of complement to their sort of a modern complement. And it is at the end of the day not doing much different from what maybe Illustrator did in the past. And in the past, literally, we were using Illustrator all the time. So these design tools sort of change. And right now, Figma is a great tool for most UI design.
So what can you do with it?
So it is it's a drawing package at the end of the day. So it lets you design on a canvas similar to what Illustrator offered. Draw elements, put boxes, and their killer feature, if you will, for why they got successful was that they handled multi-user editing very well from day one. So even in a large design team, if you are working on something together, then everybody, being able to work in the same document, it sounds simple to say today. How could it ever be different? But you don't have to go long back in time before we were sort of creating files and sharing files and opening, and this is V1 and this is V2 and final and all that. So Figma is sort of the preferred tool for design teams, certainly in Microsoft and in many other places. So
being maybe more on the development side or code writing side than you are, I think I've seen some of these Figmas and sometimes so you, as you say, you create them usually early in the development process or at an early stage, and sometimes it's a little bit it sets expectations high, because you must admit it's easier to design a feature in a way with Figma. You can draw pretty much what you want. But sometimes you end up in these, I know you and I have had some interaction in the past where you come up with something and then when we actually have to implement it, then you realize it's actually more expensive than in terms of time and maybe also complexity. But I think we're having you're having a good dialogue with our developers so how my question, I guess, is how far do you get when you come with the first Figmas and when the feature ends up being implemented, how much does the actual feature ends up diverging from the original Figma you created?
Right. No, I think there are two parts to what you say there. One is clearly that where you start is usually not where you end up. And that is sort of because the nature of software development and sort of navigating in this sort of ERP space and building these features are, relatively complex. So the initial idea about what this should do, and then where it ends up after working with engineers, PMs, doing user research, and factoring all that up into the solution means that you often end up in another place than you thought you would, which is, you could say, the right place to end up, because at that point in time you have factored in input from all these peoples and all these insights. And I have an example of that we can also look at. So that is one side of it, that you simply get wiser along the process, and you need to change to accommodate all this input. The other part is then being in Figma or any design tool you choose. And as I mentioned, we have used Illustrator, we have used InVision, we have used InDesign. There's a bunch of packages, even PowerPoint. I mean, PowerPoint is still very sort of low cost in terms of creating something where you can click through and you can create an illusion of an experience that people can react to. And that is really sort of the secret sauce in UX and UX design, is that you need to let users understand where you are wanting to take them. And it's very effective to show users a journey or a click-through, and they can instantly react to that. It's much harder in words to describe. First you go to this screen, and then there's a button, and then you go to that screen, and then there's another button. It's very hard for most people to visualize that. And if you put them in front of a Figma, where it's just a mock-up of the actual experience, or PowerPoint, your favorite tool, you can simulate what they would experience, and most people will react to it. And that is what we do for a living, so to say. We are selling the vision of how great this could be. And then when reality hits, often we need to scale down some ambitions, and we can maybe do it in another way, mitigate it. But it's very important as a design team to put out these ideas or visions of how great it could be, to inspire people. Also, inspire people in your role of the organization to say, hey, this is actually super cool. Let's see if we can do that. And then at the end of the day, what we ship is, again, as I mentioned before, sort of accommodating a lot of different requirements. So when you compare the two, the vision to what we're actually shipping, you sometimes say, but then there's a next release and a next release out of that. So I think you've also seen exactly. So with some of the recent AI features, the prompt dialogue, for example, our initial version V1 was very sort of limited, but then we have continued building it out. So today it's I would say the best tool to build Copilot features for Business Central, and we can put Copilot actions and so on. We have the whole sort of foundation in place for delivering great Copilot features, and that has certainly accommodated a lot of different requirements along the way. So I would say it's even better now in the product than it was in the initial sketches. Right, so that also sometimes happens.
So you mentioned several times user testing.
Yeah.
So you actually doing you're having like real users from the real world coming. Are they coming here at Microsoft and you show them some? How does it work? Tell us a little bit about it. You show them some early version of the products and see how they react.
Yes, all of the above.
All of the above, yeah. So are you sitting like behind a one-way mirror or something? Is that I know we have a room like that here. So you do use it?
So let me first say that we call ourselves a design team, but design team actually means we're also doing a lot of user research. So we should rightfully say the UX design and research team. It just gets so long. So in a practical terms, design sort of encompasses everything you need to do to deliver these features from a design side. So the user research part is typically in two buckets. There are what we call the generative research, where you basically just go out to customers, partners, and observe a problem or a challenge or just work practice. And we call it generative research because it is not sort of necessarily answering a particular question. It's more generating maybe a set of questions. How could this be better? How could this be more interesting? And then later in the process, when you have something you have designed and you want to find out how will this UI design work? How will this and that work in the hands of users? Then you go also out to customers also as a research activity, more sort of with a evaluative perspective, where you're literally going to the party with something under your arm,
Something
and you want to see
half baked or
some as early as you can do it,
Yeah.
typically, because it's much cheaper to change a PowerPoint than it is to change something that you have coded. So the more discoveries you can do before you put stuff into code is usually better. So to have these feedback loops and insight loops, yes, we are engaging customers and partners, and it happens these days, I mean, as you would expect, mostly online.
Okay.
So in the old days, it would be that we had a special lab on site here with a one-way glass. And
So why is the one-way glass? What's the purpose of it?
the purpose
So it's like
is
it looks like
and
an
was-
interrogation room in the movies, right?
Yes, and that's a bad sort of feeling if people feel they're being interrogated.
They're being
So-
watched for sure.
Yes, and that was exactly the problem. What typically happened in the past, at least, was that you would have someone who was your participant, someone you wanted to give you feedback, and you want to make them feel comfortable. You don't want to have sort of an exam kind of situation where they feel
You
they
don't
are
look,
being
look
tested.
them over the shoulder for every time they click on
Exactly.
something.
That's what you don't want. So,
okay.
so you wanted to create sort of an informal situation where they could give you feedback on your design and be comfortable with that. Even give you critical feedback, which is also super hard if you consider sort of the situation they're in. And to avoid them feeling observed and to avoid them feeling like they were at an exam, you typically wanted them to be just talking to one person. So I mean, if you were my test person, I would be sort of sitting and having a conversation like us, and we would have the screen and we would sort of talk about the software. And if there were sort of 10 people in the room at the same time observing you, then you would not feel relaxed.
No.
So it was, back in the days, an attempt to create a more natural setting. I'm not sure they achieved that, but that was the idea. But coming back to today, as you would expect, most happens online.
Okay.
So the way we run these, what we call lab studies, is not really in a lab. It is on Teams or some specialized tools where fundamentally it works the same way as if you had invited people in. So you make set up a meeting with someone who has signed up to this, maybe recruited from our user insights panel that we have for people who are helping us try out Business Central early on. And then you have typically a one-to-one or with a colleague, and give them a link to the software. They're sharing their screen. You ask them to solve a particular task in Business Central, and you don't give them how to do it. You want them typically to discover how to do it.
So we're building the product to be and the features to be as discoverable as possible. Like that's basically
for some features that's super.
You don't need like to read. You don't need to read the documentation for some features. You shouldn't have to. That's a goal for some of the features?
For some of the features, yes, exactly. You said it there. Dependent on the feature, it will determine how you want to test it. Because obviously, if you are designing someone like the onboarding stuff, the onboarding experience, obviously we couldn't expect that people being onboarded, trying Business Central for the first time, knew Business Central. So when you're testing onboarding features, you pretty much have to accept that they don't know Business Central.
So it has to be highly discoverable.
It has to be discoverable by someone who doesn't know where usually to look in Business Central. But with another feature, we built the analysis mode for grids. We were not designing that for users who were new to Business Central.
Therefore,
so that was sort of
this is for experienced users.
It is mostly for experienced users who come to have the need to do these kind of analysis. So when we were recruiting users to try that particular features, we were recruiting users who had experience with Business Central. When we were recruiting people to try onboarding, we were recruiting folks that didn't know Business Central. So it also about sort of connecting and making sort of the recruit the people that are relevant for the feature that you are designing.
So you had some examples you wanted to show us.
Yes. Let's look at, for example, the analysis mode first. And you mentioned this about the mock-ups versus what we actually ship.
Yeah.
So here is an example of, on the left-hand side, the mock-up from the PowerPoint in this case. When we were sort of trying out
before
and
the feature
research,
got implemented.
before anyone wrote any code for this, we designed how would it be to use if the feature was in the product. And this was the version on the left-hand side that we tested with users. And you can see here, if you compare it to the right-hand side, that is the version that you actually shipped, that initially we had the idea that the tabs of the analysis would be at the bottom of the page, and then we would have the normal action bar at the top of the page. And in user testing, this turned out to be not a great solution, because users, even experienced users of Business Central, would overlook the tabs in the bottom. So we can speculate why they were overlooking it.
But you ended up moving them at the top then.
But at the end of the day, the solution we opted for were to say, well, let's put the tabs at the top of the page, and that tested very well with users. So that was one very concrete example. There was a lot of debates and speculations why these tabs were not being noticed. But at the end of the day, we can't go forward with a feature where more than half of the test participants were not noticing these tabs here. So they came at the top.
So we have that level of control on the UI because we at Microsoft designed the UI, but our partners can't control it that much. I'll get back to that. But,
yes.
But I think we need to talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely.
But let's save it for the end.
Yes. And quickly stated, that is why it's so important that we get these decisions right, exactly for that reason. Yes. Another example I wanted to also show, so where does this feature start and where did it end up?
There was a company switch.
Feature, exactly, the company switcher. So on the left-hand side is the PowerPoint mockup we created, and on the right-hand side is what we're actually shipping. And apart from, the way that we are using icons and so on, you can see that it is pretty close in conceptual side. There's a list of companies, but two important things happened along the way that sort of radically changed this feature, and is a good example of what we are learning along the way. And one was that this notion of environments that some customers have is that they have access to multiple environments. So along the way, we said, well, this is not actually a company switcher. What users want here is an environment and company switcher.
So that's more an environment switching.
Exactly, because when customers are having access to more environments, then before this feature, it was super hard for them actually to discover the other environments. And if they wanted to switch from a company in one environment to a company in another environment, that was next to impossible unless you had a sort of URL you could click and knew how to do it. So this started out as a relatively simple feature. How difficult can it be to switch company? To actually
it's just a drop down of some kind.
Exactly. To actually be a pretty complex features that involved platform teams and client teams, of course, to make sure that we were able to know which environments were available to each of these users here, and then factor that into the UI. And it also is an example of how we wanted to align with how Microsoft does it, because what is known as the environment selector at the top of the app bar, you can see it's here on the right-hand side, says environment. That was a pattern that was already existing in other Microsoft products, such as Power, all the Power Platform environments.
Power Platform, Dataverse-based.
Exactly. So when we ended up saying, well, this is also about environments, then clearly we didn't want to design an environment selector that was done in another way than people would expect it. So we ended up sort of aligning with how you trigger that. And to make that concrete, I can just show you here the two mockups that we ended up not doing. One on the left-hand side, you can see there's an available companies link. We decided not to do that, and we decided also not to do the other idea we had, where there was a tooltip on the company indicator to switch company. The moment we realized that selecting company and environment through the app bar would be the right way to align, we went that way all out, all in.
So it seems to be a simple feature, but it shows that turns out to be a little more involved than you would think, right?
Yes, as you also perfectly know, when you open some of these areas, it is often sort of a Pandora's box of requirements from customers, partners, internal teams, and so on. And it all has to come together in a user interface.
When I used to work in the client team, we worked together quite a lot, and I used to be, always impressed how you would be able, how patient you were with, because the thing with UI and UX, that a lot of people, as opposed to other things, everybody thinks they're experts, but clearly a lot of people are not, and everybody has an opinion on, which color it should be, how much spacing there should be there. But most of the time, working with you, I came to realize how much complexity there is and how much science there is also into all these things, and I think it's best to rely on experts like you to, make these decisions rather than trying to, have an opinion on, which color it should be. Right?
Thank you for the confidence, Vincent. I hope I can live up to that. But clearly, people have opinions for good reasons, because when we were working with the engineers, they obviously have good opinions, and we need to factor that into it. So I think about it more as aligning and accommodating all these different opinions and requirements. And then, of course, there are areas where, colors, where it can come across as more subjective. But even that, when you look into it, is also a complex mix of brand considerations, accessibility requirements, and so on. Yeah. So not even color is sort of a place where you can just pick a random choice and go with it, because it will either sort of not be on brand, or it will create problems in terms of combinations when people are colorblind and colors are being confirmed. So I think my work is, I love what we're doing, but I think really about it as trying to accommodate all these requirements and opinions, and make sure that we are designing on the best possible sort of foundation of and insights for that.
So how about redlines? Do you have an example of redlines?
Yes, if we continue in the deck here, I can just quickly show here also an example from onboarding. This is a very early mock-up for our onboarding screen. So if our viewers don't recognize it, it's because this was never built. Okay. This is an example of a screen where we said this was a good initial idea, but we ended up saying that this experience where we were sort of pretty much taking over the whole screen right off the bat when users came into Business Central, that was not a good solution, because a lot of users we found would look to how can I explore Business Central before digging into these onboarding experiences.
So kind of too invasive in a way.
It was too modal, because it was sort of required that you did that before you could start using Business Central. So you will recognize this screen. This is sort of the banner where users can decide to engage with the banner, but they can also decide to just navigate Business Central and try something else. And then when they are ready for it, they can open this checklist. And again, this is being presented in a way that's totally optional. So if they don't want to do this, they can still use Business Central on the side and close it also. So your question about redlines, I took some examples here of what we call redlines, and they're called redlines because you can see it is the UI, and then there are sort of red annotations with
the kind of an overlay over the design your team produce.
Exactly. So this is produced in Figma. So this is my great team members who are very skilled at Figma, much more than I am, who are pretty much documenting at a very precise level of detail that is needed to actually go and implement this.
So it's all down to the font size, the margin size, the spacing between the different elements, all these things.
Yes.
And you give that to the developers, and then they have to implement that.
Yes, so there is a bit more clever handoff these days from Figma to developers, so they don't need necessarily to go and read on the little red text here. We can actually hand sort of it off in a digital form, so they can take over the CSS from Figma directly. So it's become a little more smooth. But at the end of the day, this is sort of the specification, and it goes into sometimes to many sort of a surprising level of details, because what we have to do here is also to test how will this react when suddenly more text appears in these here. So we are making tests of how will these components react when other contents come into it.
Mhm.
And as you know, we also have to look at localization. So Business Central is being available in a lot of languages, and
that's also a challenge. Yeah.
which means that the content that we are designing for is not actually known at the point in time where we are designing the components. So we need to make sure that all the components we design are flexible in their sizing. So when it scales up or down, that the text still flows and looks reasonable. So that is you could say the final stage of the design process is that we are producing the design specification at this level of detail, and that is being used as the sort of the check or the rule book, if you will, for okay, when we look at this in the product, is it correct? Is it aligned? Is the margin correct? And so on. If any doubt is there, then this is where we can go and check what was the intention. So sort of to sum it up, it's all about getting from the design intention that we are establishing together with app PMs and client PMs and the engineer leads and so on, and all the way down to the final product where that intention hopefully sort of is visible.
So that brings me to, I think it's going to be the last question, but I think it's an important one. So when you show all this, that we have a lot of control of these UIs. I mentioned before, we can go on the pixel level and adjust these things, but Business Central is not, as opposed maybe to other type of programming. When our partners develop their features, they don't have that level of control. We kind of have decided. We have made a lot of decisions about the UI and how it's going to be. So they just express basically what they want in a page, but they don't go and adjust the pixels and decide the size of the buttons and all these things. So what advice would you give to our partners and developers when in terms of UX and design of their feature when they go? Is there anything you would recommend they should do at their level? They cannot control where they place the different elements and how they look like, or even how they behave. But is there things they should be aware of in order to get to have a great user experience for their users of their features?
Yes, there's certainly some aspects to that. And first, let me say that I'm so amazed by what our partners and community in generally are achieving with Business Central. I'm literally blown away about the creativity and ingenuity of the solutions I'm seeing at Directions and other conferences. So I'm totally confident that our partners are making the right calls in terms of how they are designing for Business Central, and we are working hard to make it possible for them and for partners in general to do the customizations that they need to do to deliver a great experience to their customers. And that is sort of our priority number one, that our customers get solutions based on Business Central that is the best you can have. And we are doing that by standardizing. I mean, we are standardizing how should a certain page type work and look, and we are doing it by reducing flexibility, and that is sort of where where it can sometimes get complicated with Business Central, because we are providing a spectrum of flexibility. And if you stay within that spectrum of flexibility in terms of, then you have a good time with Business Central. And the problem is, of course, when you want to do something that Business Central is not supporting, then suddenly it gets super complicated. But I think it's useful to think about, and I know that people know this already, of course. If you go and build a Power App, for example, to do the same thing that a Business Central card page can do, it will be a lot of work, right? You will have to take care of a lot of stuff on your own if you were to build a page as complex as the standard card page in Business Central.
There's a lot of functionality built in the card page that you get for free, basically, by just saying, I just want a page, and then you just get it. And
yes. So I think the trade-off when you're building for Business Central is that you trade off some flexibility, but you get a lot of behaviors and translations, and not to mention security and so on. As that, so in some situations that trade-off is easy to establish because you don't need the flexibility for a certain case. If you have to create a highly customized solution for a customer, then I would certainly look at Power App. I mean, is this scenario worth doing a Power App for instead of trying to hack the way around Business
and we
Central?
have good integration between Power Apps and Business Central anyway.
Yes, I think the story around what you can do to connect Business Central data to other places is a super story. So that is sometimes the right trade-off to make.
All right. Thank you, Jacob. That was really interesting. Another aspect of how we build Business Central. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy this episode.